Kojima intended Raiden in MGS4 to be a parody of the player's demand for a badass playable character by depicting him as a miserable, emotional wreck whose only wish is to be with his family again. But most players missed the point entirely and demanded a game where they could control Raiden in his cool ninja persona. The very same people who hated playing as Raiden in MGS2 now wanted to play as him again, and thus, Metal Gear Rising was born. Previously, I have stressed the importance of taking Hideo Kojima's intentions into account when analyzing Metal Gear's story and characters. But this doesn't really apply as much to Metal Gear Rising, because Kojima had absolutely nothing to do with the game's script, or anything in the game's universe. Kojima himself admitted that his only ulterior motive for Rising was that he wanted the game to sell so that he could get away with exploring taboo subjects for Metal Gear Solid 5. Because of the more commercial motivation behind Metal Gear Rising, Kojima wanted to focus on satisfying the player's power fulfillment fantasy, rather than challenging it like he did with past games. He wanted the game to be designed as an outlet for stress relief, rather than to convey a profound message. Whereas Kojima's games are concerned with using the game systems to reinforce the story, with Rising, everything about the story was sacrificed to serve the gameplay. And whereas Kojima is very serious about the lessons he wished to convey through the Metal Gear Solid games, with Metal Gear Rising, Kojima treats the game like a joke. His idea for Rising 2 is one where Grey Fox fights zombies powered by nanomachines. The only time Kojima ever took Rising's story seriously was when an interviewer asked him about his thoughts on Raiden's ethics throughout the game. Kojima explains that Raiden is someone who wants to live a happy life with Rose, but he became so twisted from his experiences as a child soldier that happiness constantly eludes him. Some would argue that this means that Raiden was always doomed to repeat his past mistakes, and that he never had a chance. But Kojima is no fatalist. At the end of MGS2, Kojima has Solid Snake stress the fact that, ultimately, Raiden's fate is his own choice.
I know you didn't have much in terms of choices this time. But everything you felt, thought about during this mission is yours. And what you decide to do with them is your choice.
You mean start over?
Yeah, a clean slate, a new name, new memories. Choose your own legacy. It's for you to decide. It's up to you.
The thing that Rising's defenders and critics need to understand is that the point of Raiden's ending in MGS2 and 4 isn't simply that he got a happy ending. Rather, the point was that Raiden chooses to acknowledge the truth about himself and worked to deal with his problems, that he would see things for what they are. With Rose, Kojima tried to show players the hard but healthy choice, one that forced them to face reality and own up to their problems. But Kojima knew that this wasn't the only choice. Raiden could have also chosen to ignore Rose and Solid Snake, and instead continue to be Jack the Ripper, just like how players can continue to avoid facing their problems and instead live in a fantasy. And as the negative reaction to MGS2 showed, most people made the latter choice of ignoring the game's message. All Kojima is saying with this quote is that Raiden wants to be happy with Rose, but doing the right thing is hard. According to Kojima, Rising is about Raiden giving up on making the hard but healthy choice. So while it does suck that Rising undermines Raiden's ending in MGS4, Rising could have at least been an opportunity to show the consequences of Raiden not following Rose and Solid Snake's advice. To show the consequences of ignoring MGS2's message, as so many players have done, even after Kojima tried to reiterate it in MGS4. But of course, it must be restated, Kojima had nothing to do with the story of Metal Gear Rising. So Kojima's interpretation of Raiden in the game is simply his interpretation, which isn't necessarily what the game actually intended. So the question becomes, how well does Kojima's interpretation hold up in the game itself? Early on, Rising actually seems like a tolerable evolution of Raiden's story. In optional codec conversations, Raiden explains that the reason he works for Maverick is because he wants to support his family, but couldn't find a job outside of military work.
Good jobs aren't easy to come by these days, even for non-cyborgs. And I've got a family to feed.
But even though circumstances have dragged him into battle yet again, he's still shown to keep his connection to life outside of battle in mind.
I'd like to see my family again someday, you know? My son's going to forget he even has a father. I can't see him all the time with work and all, but whenever I'm back home, he's always so excited to see me. When I see that, I feel like, you know, I want to do whatever I can to keep him happy. I can understand trying to find the ideal woman when you're young, but you know what? It's those little imperfections, those idiosyncrasies that keep things interesting in the long run. You come to appreciate that kind of stuff in a lifetime relationship.
These moments are perfectly in character for Raiden, showing how, even when in the middle of a mission, his family is always his first priority, just like it was all the way back at Big Shell.
I'm kind of busy right now, Rose.
You're right, sorry.
I do remember. It was right after I transferred to New York. There are all these tourists around you in front of the Federal Hall.
Unfortunately, all of these conversations can only be found in completely optional codec calls. Even the call that explains how Raiden wants to provide for his family is treated as an Easter egg. In other words, Raiden's family, the most important thing in his life, is given the same treatment as Johnny's diarrhea in MGS2.
To come all the way to New York just to get hit with a bowel attack.
When Raiden's motivations are explored in Rising's cutscenes, it has nothing to do with providing for his family. Rather, Raiden's motivations appear to be a strong sense of justice.
There's a saying I like. One sword keeps another in the sheath. Sometimes the threat of violence alone is a deterrent. Sometimes by taking a life, others can be preserved. People who terrorize and take innocent lives for money. They sowed their fate when they took this job. I'm just the Reaper.
Unlike Raiden providing for his family, Raiden's black and white tool of justice credo is absolutely not in character, as he should already be aware of the morally gray realities of war from Snake.
People will remember only the good part, the right part of what you did.
There's no right part in murder. Not ever.
Raiden, at this point, should have a more nuanced worldview, one that believes in higher ideals, but never disregards the weight of his actions. But one thing that both motivations have in common is that they're both completely dropped in Chapter 3. Not only does Raiden quit his job, seemingly forgetting that he has a family to feed, but in a conversation with Doctor, it's revealed that there are actually plenty of non-military jobs for cyborgs.
You planning on signing him up with a PMC? Because that's the only job we're good for, far as I can tell.
Oh, you are quite mistaken there. Just consider it. The power of a machine matched with the nimbleness and creativity of a human. The construction and public works possibilities alone are endless. I saw a news piece on German TV just the other day about a cyborg plumber, in fact.
Notice how Raiden doesn't use his own experience looking for a job to dismiss Doctor's claims. He's treating everything Doctor is telling him as new information that he wasn't aware of. So Raiden working to provide for his family was a farce from the beginning. We don't hear anything about Rose and Little John's financial situation after Raiden leaves Maverick. At most, Raiden informs Boris that
they're in New Zealand. Safe. Rose would understand why I have to do this.
And that's it. That's the most substantial information we get about Raiden's family outside of optional codec conversations. Yeah, remember how in MGS2, Rose was what kept Raiden alive the entire time?
You need to stay alive so you can.
Okay, that's a deal.
It makes no sense for Rising to treat Rose as such an expendable character, unless her absence actually plays an integral role in the storyline. In MGS 2 and 4, Solid Snake and Rose worked hard to preserve Raiden's humanity. Solid Snake helped Raiden get back on the right path, and Rose married Campbell in order to protect their son, so that Raiden had something to come back to when he was done fighting. Now, Solid Snake is presumed dead, and Rose isn't anywhere to be seen. No one's around to bail Raiden out of his despair. But then, Raiden says something that is completely out of character.
I learned young that killing your enemies felt good. Really good.
Specifically, the Japanese version of this line.
認めたくなかったが、心の奥で俺は戦場を求めていた。
But wait, according to Kojima's quote, and, well, all of MGS2 and 4, Raiden is a lost soul tortured by the battlefield. As Kojima said, he's only truly happy when he's with Rose. But now, Rising is saying the opposite, that Raiden is only happy when he's on the battlefield.
What I hate more than anything else in the world is my own past.
Actually, I should thank you.
What are you talking about?
If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't have gotten Jack back.
Raiden is happy to have Jack the Ripper back. It's quite funny how, in the one time where Kojima tries to take Rising's story seriously, he ends up severely contradicting it. Many fans would describe the scene with Monsoon as the turning point for Raiden, the moment where he finally admits that he only used his higher ideals as an excuse to kill.
I told myself this was about justice, about protecting the weak, but I was wrong.
And that by embracing Jack the Ripper, Raiden has finally embraced his true motivation for fighting.
Pain. This is why I fight.
But Rising never actually goes all the way with that. In the very next scene, Raiden goes on about how he still wants to rescue kids.
Relax. I'll get the brains.
Furthermore, Raiden hardly ever does anything morally questionable, and the long-term consequences of his actions are frequently ignored.
I was made to kill soldiers, POWs, civilians.
Now, Jack is back, and yet he conveniently only kills enemy combatants. When Jack the Ripper does get the opportunity to kill a civilian, the most he can do is tear off their clothes.
Seriously? You get off on that kind of thing?
Raiden, what the hell, man? This is your idea of a good time? Stripping dudes in public?
Seriously, Kevin? You're gonna bitch about that, but not the part where Raiden cuts a child in half?
He's not dead, though. Actually, he really digs his new body.
Oh, I guess that makes it okay. Yeah, the most shocking scene in the game has been sanitized by this cop-out. Remember that scene where Wolf refused to shake Raiden's hand and Raiden goes Ripper right in front of Sunny? If Raiden had truly embraced the Ripper, Sunny should have been reduced to a red puddle. Because that's what it means to embrace the Ripper. That's what it means to fight only because feeling and inflicting pain is fun. But does Rising boldly show us the consequences of embracing the Ripper? No, of course not.
Sorry, not really.
Remember when Kojima said he wanted Rising to satisfy the player's power fulfillment fantasy? He wanted Rising to provide stress relief for the player. If the player protagonist cuts down sweet little Sunny out of pure rage, this would only break the player's fantasy. So, the consequences of Raiden embracing the Ripper have been severely downplayed. The only thing Jack the Ripper does to Raiden is give him an awesome superpower that cuts down enemies like butter. Yes, rather than portraying Raiden's emotional scars as a tragic burden, Rising portrays Raiden's PTSD as a source of empowerment. Atsutamari, I don't think that's how PTSD works.
Without the proper treatment, their symptoms will worsen, eventually leaving them unfit for combat entirely.
But the moment when Rising's stupidity finally reaches the point of no return is this scene.
I chose this. They're kids, you son of a bitch.
But the entire game makes a point about how these kids are going through a virtual simulation of what Raiden went through under Solidus's command.
We've already commenced the outbreak. A Sears program? Yep. Same one old Georgie boy used on the kids in Liberia.
These kids are exactly like Raiden. They never had a choice.
I'm not like Snake. I never questioned why we fought. There was no purpose, no way out. They give you a gun, you ask how many to kill. If you didn't, you were the one they shot instead.
And yet, for some ass-backwards reason, Rising tries to make it seem like Jack the Ripper was something Raiden chose, rather than something that was conditioned into him. The only time Jack the Ripper is portrayed as something that was forced on Raiden is in an optional codec conversation.
All the drugs, the non-stop violence, it destroyed my sense of judgment completely. Maybe it's in my blood. Maybe it's the Sears program. Probably both. I gotta do what I can to stop that VR training. I'm not the only one suffering.
Notice how this is a running theme in the game. Raiden's suffering from Jack the Ripper is only in an optional codec conversation. Raiden's higher ideals are only in optional codec conversations. And of course, Raiden loving his family is only in optional codec conversations. Basically, anything about Raiden's character that doesn't cater to the player's childish power fulfillment fantasy is shoved aside to optional codec conversations. But the biggest insult to Rose's character doesn't come from her absence. It comes from this line.
In America, my friends, my family, they helped me forget the devil inside.
But in MGS2, she did the exact opposite.
Okay then, let's talk about you.
Me?
Yeah, your least favorite subject.
Listen, Rose, I'm right in the middle of a mission and
Why? Why can't you relax when you're with me?
Look, the mission,
Why don't you open up to me? Jack, I've been thinking for a long time. You've got a no trespassing sign pasted on your heart.
What?
No entry beyond this point. You've got it written all over your heart. But someday, do you think you might let me in to the other side of that sign?
If anything, Raiden was the one who wanted to forget the devil inside.
I don't want to share my past with anyone. I just want to forget about it.
Rose's entire role in MGS2 was to have Raiden open up and come to terms with his dark secrets.
I accept the good and the bad, Jack. That's what you do for someone you love.
And thus we are shown the difference between Rose and all of Raiden's allies in Metal Gear Rising. Rose doesn't willfully blind herself from Raiden's bad parts like Courtney or Sunny does, and she doesn't try to justify Raiden's bad parts like Blade Wolf does. She accepts the good and the bad.
I didn't know anything about you, I admit that. Where you were born, how you grew up. But I know that now. And I know that what I feel for you can only get better. And I'll share in your past if that's the price.
But Metal Gear Rising, like most players, didn't understand Rose. And because of this statement of pure slander, Etsu Tamari has solidified his incompetence. The scene that best represents the contrast between Metal Gear Solid 2's message and Metal Gear Rising's message comes from the dying words of Senator Armstrong.
You carve your own path. Use whatever methods you see fit. You don't let legal bullshit get in the way. And if it costs a few lives, so be it.
On the surface, Armstrong telling Raiden to carve his own path is very similar to Solid Snake telling Raiden to choose his own legacy.
You can find your own name and your own future.
Decide for myself?
And whatever you choose will be you.
But here's the thing. Armstrong tells Raiden to continue fighting, even if it costs a few lives. But by continuing to fight, Raiden is only bending over to Solidus's will.
So, Jack the Ripper, will it be Solidus, the Patriot's creation, or you, Solidus's creation?
On the other hand, when Raiden offers to help Snake in his fight against the Patriots, Snake refuses.
Count me in.
No, you have things to do first. And people you need to talk to.
Snake knows that Jack the Ripper isn't something Raiden chose for himself, which is why he advised Raiden to stay away from war, go back to Rose, and start over with his life. In Kojima's Metal Gear, fighting is a waste of life. But in Etsu Tamari's Metal Gear, fighting for its own sake is treated as admirable. Sadly, Rising ends with Raiden taking Armstrong's advice, rather than Solid Snake's. Rather than finding a new name for himself, Raiden has simply regressed back to his old name. Rather than starting over with a clean slate, Raiden continues to allow his past to define him. Rather than strike out and pave his own way, all Raiden ever does in Metal Gear Rising is conform. He conforms to both Solidus's conditioning and to the player's power fulfillment fantasy, the very fantasy that Rose tried to save Raiden from. Perhaps this is the real reason why Rose is absent in Metal Gear Rising. Rather than portray Raiden as someone who struggles with, but ultimately overcomes his dark past, like it should be, or portray him as a despicable monster, which would at least make sense on its own terms, Metal Gear Rising instead portrays Raiden as try-hard McCool, a generic badass vigilante with conventional morality, as an outlet for player gratification.
The Raiden I know is a hero.
Rose's role in MGS2 was to get Raiden and the player to snap out of their delusional power fulfillment fantasy and come back to reality. But Rising wants players to forget reality as much as possible and indulge in their power fulfillment fantasy. Metal Gear Rising doesn't want players to see things for what they are. In one of his biographies, film director Quentin Tarantino makes an interesting point about the psychology behind people's reactions towards extreme violence in his films. He explains that audience members tend to be more responsive towards a paper cut than, say, an exploding head, because you can't relate to the sensation of having your head blown off. To most people, it's just a cool special effect. But when they see a paper cut, they cringe and look away, because they can relate to that painful sensation. Raiden in Metal Gear Rising is the exploding head. Nobody knows what it's actually like to be a sociopath, so most players just sit back and enjoy slicing dudes to tiny pieces without any self-reflection. Raiden in Sons of Liberty is the paper cut. Players can actually see the dark parts of themselves in Raiden.
You turn your back on everything you don't like. You do whatever you like, see only the things you like, and for yourself alone.
For most players, the flaws that make Raiden such a shitty person hit so close to home that they loathed Rose for constantly bringing up Raiden's faults. In the same way that one would look away from seeing a paper cut in a movie. They hated Rose because she tried to make them see things for what they are. Whenever I think about Rose's significance in Raiden's life, I always think about a passage from Project Ito's novelization of MGS4, from the scene where Jack is reunited with his family. Part of me thinks that in this moment, Rose truly became John's mother. She stopped fearing this man, the father of her child. She accepted him the way he was. As Jack began to acknowledge his role in their family, she too started down a new path. How many detours had she taken before reaching this point? Much she had given up, and much she had lost. Jack had come dangerously close to stripping all meaning from her sacrifices. He had selfishly rejected life and basked in the comfort of nihilism and despair. "I won't lose my way again," said Raiden. "I don't have time to waste in searching for myself. I have too much to do now, as a father." Sadly, with Rose's continued unpopularity and marginalization, it appears that her sacrifices were in vain after all. But it doesn't have to be that way.
I know you didn't have much in terms of choices this time. But everything you felt, thought about during this mission is yours. And what you decide to do with them is your choice.
You mean start over?
Yeah, a clean slate, a new name, new memories. Choose your own legacy. It's for you to decide. It's up to you.
Whether or not Rose's sacrifices were truly stripped of their meaning is ultimately up to you, the player. So you can either choose to continue basking in the comforts of a power fulfillment fantasy, or you can choose to see things for what they are.
See me for what I am, okay?
I know.
I hope you found this analysis of Jack and Rosemary to be fun and insightful, and I hope you all enjoy The Phantom Pain when it finally comes out. But before I go, there's one more thing that I think needs to be addressed.
We watched King Kong in your apartment a bunch of times that night. Didn't sleep till morning.
Just so you know, they didn't actually spend all night watching King Kong. I'll let you figure that one out for yourself.